No one knows that best than my next guest, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who spent 4 years in opposition, led the coalition back into government with that landslide win in 2013. And he joins me now to discuss where to now for the new government, but of course where to for his beloved Liberal Party. Welcome to the show, Tony. Thank you for your time. We're a little bit abbreviated because we started off with the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, with his announcement of the ministry. So let's start with Labor. What do you make of the lineup? What do you make of Labor's win and that decision last week to get sworn in and very quickly go to the Quad? Now we know the ministry and the focus of Labor. What's your thoughts?
Well, obviously, we have to accept the election outcome. Labor only got a bit under a third of the primary vote, but with preferences and the way seats have fallen out, they're forming a majority government. So we have to accept the outcome. And frankly, we've got to wish the new government well, because if the government goes well, our country goes better. I think Anthony Albanese will try to be in the mould of Bob Hawke. Hawke certainly did have the smarts, the steel and the charisma to be an extremely effective Prime Minister. And I can understand why Anthony Albanese wants to be Hawke Mark II. I think his difficulty is that he's got a lot of green left utopians in the Parliament and in his party. And given the rather precarious economic and security circumstances we face, I think the government really does have a struggle and a challenge on its hands.
He's also got a lot of retreads from the Rudd-Gillard era. Now, let's hope they've learned lessons. Let's hope they've reflected on that chaos. I mean, one of the good things about getting to 76 today for our country is we've avoided a hung parliament, and I'd rather see Labor in power than a hung parliament again. At the election and in the campaign, a lot of debate about the lack of policy from either side. And given the low primary vote for the Liberal Party, given the low primary vote from Labor, and the fact that about a third of voters didn't support the two major parties, we've got a curious result that we're focused, yes, on the Liberal Party and why they're in opposition, but there's also long-term concerns there for Labor, isn't there?
Absolutely right. Labor is losing votes to the Greens, just like the coalition is losing votes to splinter parties on the right. Both of the big parties have got to do more to reconnect with wider sections of the electorate. But that doesn't mean just pandering to fashionable concerns. It means winning arguments. It doesn't just mean asserting virtue and ticking boxes. It means going out there with good policies and winning arguments. And I think both sides of politics in the last few years have been a bit scared of taking hard decisions, taking difficult but sometimes necessary choices and arguing them through. But that's what we need more of from our senior leaders on both sides.
All right, let's go to the Liberal Party then. Elected unopposed yesterday, Peta Credlin. In his first comments to the media, he signalled a return to the fundamentals of Menzies. He in particular spoke about the forgotten people. Now, did the Liberals lose their way? Is that why we need to once again be reminded about Menzies? And in comments that the concerns of the Liberal Party, he said, weren't to be found in the fashionable suburbs. They weren't with the powerful who already had their own voice and power. They were with basically middle Australia. Had the Libs lost their way, Tony Abbott?
Peter, I'm not going to be critical of the Morrison government because the Morrison government had some significant achievements to its credit, most notably AUKUS, standing up to China, and what I think is the quite historic long-term achievement of a trade deal with India, which has the potential over time to replace China as an economic partner of ours. But I do think there are a lot more votes in Western Sydney and Western Melbourne than there are in Vaucluse and Toorak. So I do think that Peta Credlin has got his focus right in saying that the Liberal Party is most definitely going to try to be the representative of today's equivalent of Menzies' forgotten people.
I've been pretty critical of state Liberal Party divisions. We saw them lose after one term in South Australia. The same thing happened in Victoria. They're basically in permanent opposition. In fact, in Victoria, we've got one Liberal government in New South Wales, one in Tasmania, but basically a rump in places like WA and around the country. In your state of New South Wales, they only got candidates in the field just days before the PM called the election. How do you beat an incumbent if you haven't even named a candidate? Do the state divisions have to lift their game?
Most definitely. I think I said a few weeks back, Peter, that we needed to have a come to Jesus moment after the election. Well, the election has
Are we having that now?
And gone. We do need to have a come to Jesus moment. I think in the New South Wales division, frankly, heads have got a roll. Inside the Lay Party, we can't have the kind of factional machinations which we saw, which were designed to deliberately deny democratic pre-selections. We really have to go forward as a democratic political party, not as, if you like, a barony run by rival factional warlords. It's interesting. Someone gave me a copy of the current New South Wales Division Party Constitution. It's almost 300 pages long. The original party constitution was just 30 pages long. And as well as preserving democracy inside the party, we've got to get the rules back to something which is clear and simple, that people can understand and live by, rather than the kind of mess which has turned into a lawyer's picnic.
Right, talk to me about Peter Dutton's challenge in opposition. You know that better than anyone else. When you became leader in 2009, the Liberal Party was pretty demoralised. That had three leaders in 2 and a bit years. You were the third. 6 months after you were elected leader, you faced Julia Gillard in an election and it was a draw. She won the negotiation and formed that hung parliament, formed that government, minority government. But just on a question that's already there on the table for Peter Dutton, some of his colleagues, Andrew Bragg's a notable moderate out there in the media, saying now that Labor has won, the Liberal Party must roll over and support Labor's 43% emissions target by 2030. Others say if you do that, you break faith with those who stuck by you at the election. What's your view?
Well, we have a mandate from 36% of the electorate. Labor only has a mandate from 33% of the electorate. So I think that we should stick with the position that we took to the election, which fundamentally is that, yes, we want to get emissions down, but not if it costs jobs and drives up people's cost of living. And if we do want to get emissions down, it's important to use existing technology, such as a consideration of nuclear, rather than chasing after what may well turn out to be pipe dreams, such as green hydrogen. So, look, it's very important that politics is a contest. You don't win arguments by agreeing with your opponents. You win arguments by creating a contest where you think you've got the arguments on your side. And I know Peter Dutton very well. He's a terrific bloke. I think he certainly can win the next election. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that his senior colleagues will, I am sure, give him the loyalty that the party leader deserves.
Just before we go, I've got to ask you about this voice to the Parliament. Some people say that you supported constitutional change in the past, that you now support putting this voice in the Constitution. What's your view? That's very different than when I worked with you.
Yeah, well, Peter, look, I'm very sceptical about a separate, constitutionally entrenched voice to the Parliament. I think Peter Dutton is right to ask the government to put forward its ideas, but in the end, if we want to take race out of our constitution, it's hard to do that if there is a constitutionally entrenched race-based element in the constitution. Now, I have indeed always or long supported some form of Indigenous recognition, and what I was moving towards back in 2015 but never really had the chance to develop was putting into the constitution, perhaps into the preamble, a statement which is true about our country and which includes everyone, which is that we've got an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation and an immigrant character. I think that's actually a pretty good way of describing our country. We have an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation, an immigrant character, and maybe one day in the years to come, when people from overseas ask Australians to describe our country, they can simply say that.
All right, so no voice in the Constitution and no treaty, Tony Abbott.
Look, you can't make a treaty with yourselves, and the best voice to the Parliament for Indigenous people is going to be provided by the 10 Indigenous people who are actually in the Parliament.
All right, I'll leave it there. Tony Abbott, thank you for your time. Appreciate you being very generous with us tonight.